The morning mist clung to the rice paddies like silk veils as Mei Lin knelt beside her dying mother's bed. At 18, she had never imagined her life would change so drastically in a single conversation. Her mother's trembling hand grasped hers with surprising strength. "My daughter," whispered Lady Chen, her voice barely audible above the crackling of the dying fire. "There is something you must know before I leave this world. You are not merely a farmer's daughter." Mei Lin's heart raced as her mother revealed the truth that had been hidden for 18 years. She was the illegitimate daughter of a powerful court official, conceived during a brief liaison between her mother and Minister Wei of the imperial court. This bloodline, though scandalous, made her valuable in the complex web of political marriages that bound the empire together. 3 days after her mother's funeral, the imperial messengers arrived. Dressed in magnificent silk robes bearing the dragon seal, they announced that Emperor Kangxi, now 80 years old and seeking to solidify an alliance with the southern provinces, had chosen her as his newest consort. The marriage would unite the northern capital with the rebellious southern territories through her father's political connections. Mei Lin stood frozen as the announcement echoed through their humble village. The other peasants bowed deeply, murmuring prayers and congratulations, but she felt only terror. An 80-year-old emperor, she had heard whispers of his previous wives, how young they were when they married him, and how few lived to see their 30th birthday. Her fate was sealed not by love or choice, but by the political machinations of men who saw her as nothing more than a pawn in their games of power. As the golden palanquin arrived to carry her to the Forbidden City, Mei Lin cast one last look at the rice fields where she had spent her childhood, knowing she would never see them again. The journey to the imperial capital took 7 days, each one carrying Mei Lin further from everything she had ever known. The palanquins swayed rhythmically as they traveled north, past mountains shrouded in ancient mist and through cities that grew progressively more magnificent as they approached the heart of the empire. When the walls of the Forbidden City finally came into view, Mei Lin gasped despite her fear. The massive structure rose before her like a mountain of red and gold, its curved rooftops reaching toward heaven itself. Dragons carved in jade and gold seemed to dance along every surface, and silk banners bearing the imperial seal fluttered in the breeze like captured rainbows. Lady Wu, the stern palace matron assigned to prepare her for imperial life, met her at the gates. "You will address the emperor as your divine majesty and speak only when spoken to," she instructed as they walked through courtyards filled with cherry blossoms and ornamental pools. "Your life now belongs to the empire, child. Everything you do reflects upon the honor of the imperial household." The quarters assigned to Mei Lin were more luxurious than anything she had ever imagined. Silk tapestries depicting phoenixes and lotus flowers covered the walls, while carved wooden screens divided the space into intimate areas for sleeping, studying, and receiving guests. A small army of servants attended to her every need, though she longed for the simple independence she had once taken for granted. As night fell on her first day in the palace, Mei Lin stood on her balcony overlooking the vast courtyards. Thousands of red lanterns cast a warm glow over the ancient stones, and she could hear the distant sound of music from the emperor's evening entertainments. Tomorrow, she would meet her husband for the first time. The thought made her hands tremble as she gripped the jade balustrade, wondering what secrets lay hidden behind the walls of this golden prison. Emperor Kangxi received her in the Hall of Supreme Harmony, a vast chamber where golden dragons coiled around massive red pillars that seemed to hold up the very heavens. As Mei Lin approached the throne, her silk slippers whispered against the polished marble floor, and the sound seemed to echo in the enormous space. The emperor was smaller than she had expected, though he carried himself with the dignity of absolute power. His face, lined with 80 years of life, held eyes that seemed to pierce through to her very soul. His beard, white as fresh snow, was meticulously groomed, and his imperial robes of golden silk seemed to shimmer with their own inner light. "Approach, child," he said, his voice surprisingly strong and clear. "Let me look upon the face of the woman who will be my final wife." Mei Lin performed the kowtow as she had been taught, pressing her forehead to the cold marble while her heart hammered against her ribs. When she rose, she dared to meet his gaze and was surprised by what she saw there. Instead of the cruelty or lust she had expected, she found something unexpected, a deep, inexplicable sadness. "You are very young," he observed, studying her with the intensity of a scholar examining an ancient text. "Tell me, what do you know of love, Mei Lin?" The question caught her completely off guard. She had expected commands or dismissal, not this philosophical inquiry. "Your Divine Majesty, I know only what the poets write, that love is like the spring rain that brings life to barren fields." A ghost of a smile crossed his weathered features. "An interesting answer. In my 8 decades upon this earth, I have learned that love is far more complex than the poets suggest. It can heal the deepest wounds or create them." He paused, his ancient eyes growing distant. "Our wedding will take place in 3 days. Use this time to prepare yourself, not just for marriage, but for truths that will challenge everything you believe about the nature of power and sacrifice." The Imperial Gardens became Mei Lin's refuge during those 3 days of preparation. Among the carefully cultivated bamboo groves and lotus ponds, she could almost pretend she was back in her village, though the perfectly manicured landscapes bore little resemblance to the wild rice fields of her childhood. It was there that she first encountered Lin Wei, a young palace guard whose intelligent eyes and gentle manner reminded her of the boys from her village. He was teaching martial arts to a group of younger guards, his movements flowing like water as he demonstrated ancient fighting forms that had been passed down through generations of imperial protectors. "You should not be here alone, my lady," he said when he noticed her watching from behind a flowering peach tree. "The gardens can be dangerous for those unfamiliar with court politics." Mei Lin stepped forward, intrigued by his warning. What kind of dangers could possibly exist in such a beautiful place? Lin Wei glanced around carefully before speaking in hushed tones. "The kind that come from those who smile at your face while planning your destruction behind closed doors. The previous empress died in these very gardens, supposedly from eating poisonous berries. But those of us who serve here know that berries rarely find their own way into teacups." The implication sent chills down Mei Lin's spine. She had heard whispers about the emperor's previous wives, 7 women who had married him over the decades, each one dying young under mysterious circumstances. Some said it was a curse upon the imperial line. Others whispered of more sinister explanations. "Why are you telling me this?" she asked, though she was not certain she wanted to hear the answer. "Because," Lin Wei said, his voice heavy with conviction, "sometimes the greatest danger comes not from our enemies, but from discovering that those we trust are not who they claim to be. Be very careful, Mei Lin. Your life may depend upon questioning everything you think you know about the man you're about to marry." The wedding ceremony took place at dawn, when the ancient Chinese believed the veil between earth and heaven was thinnest. Mei Lin wore robes of crimson silk embroidered with golden phoenixes, symbols of the empress and feminine power. Her hair was arranged in the traditional style, held in place with jade pins that had belonged to empresses for over 300 years. As she walked through the hall of celestial purity toward her destiny, hundreds of court officials bowed in perfect synchronization. The air was thick with incense, and the sound of traditional music played on ancient instruments. The erhu's haunting melody seemed to weep for all the young women who had walked this path before her. Emperor Kangxi waited at the altar dressed in robes that seemed to capture the very essence of imperial power. Dragons, embroidered in gold thread, coiled around his sleeves and across his chest, and his ceremonial crown caught the morning light like captured stars. Yet when their eyes met across the vast chamber, Mei Lin again saw that strange sadness she had noticed during their first encounter. The ceremony itself was elaborate beyond imagination, involving rituals that stretched back over 1,000 years. They shared wine from cups carved from white jade, exchanged rings that had been blessed by Taoist monks, and spoke vows in the ancient language of the court that few beyond the palace walls could understand. But it was during the final ritual, when the emperor placed his hand over hers to seal their union, that Mei Lin felt something that changed everything. His skin was not warm as she expected, but cold. Cold as marble, cold as winter morning, cold as death itself. She looked up at him in confusion and saw something in his ancient eyes that made her blood freeze in her veins. It was not the look of a mortal man, but something far older and more mysterious. In that moment, as the court celebrated their union with cheers and music, Mei Lin realized that she had married something that was not entirely human. The wedding feast stretched long into the night, but Mei Lin barely tasted the elaborate dishes placed before her. Her mind kept returning to that moment when her husband's hand had touched hers, the unnatural coldness that seemed to seep into her very bones. Around her, court officials celebrated with wine and laughter, but she felt as if she were watching the festivities from behind a veil of growing dread. Emperor Kangxi played his part perfectly, speaking with dignity to his guests and showing her the appropriate attention expected of a new husband. Yet throughout the evening, she noticed details that others seemed to overlook. He never ate, merely moved food around his plate. He never drank, though servants constantly refilled his wine cup. Most disturbing of all, in the flickering candlelight, she could swear that sometimes he cast no shadow. When the celebration finally ended and they were escorted to the imperial bedchamber, Mei Lin's fear reached its peak. The room was magnificent. Walls covered in silk paintings of immortal beings, furniture inlaid with mother-of-pearl, and a bed large enough for a small family. Yet all the beauty in the world could not distract her from the growing certainty that she had married something beyond mortal understanding. "You are frightened," the emperor observed as the servants withdrew, leaving them alone. His voice held neither mockery nor anger, only a weary understanding that suggested he had witnessed this fear many times before. "Your Majesty," she whispered, finding her voice with great effort. "Your hands, they are so cold." He stood by the window, silhouetted against the moonlight streaming through the ornate latte work. For a long moment he said nothing, and she wondered if she had offended him. Then he spoke, and his words changed her understanding of everything. "Cold, yes. They have been cold for more years than you can imagine, Mei Lin. Cold as the grave from which I should have departed decades ago." He turned to face her, and in the pale moonlight she could see the terrible truth written in his ancient features. "Tell me, child, what do you know of the legends surrounding immortality?" Emperor Kangxi moved to sit beside her, and Mei Lin fought every instinct that screamed at her to run. Up close she could see details that the grandeur of court ceremonies had hidden. His skin, while unlined for a man of 80, had an almost translucent quality, as if light could pass through it. His eyes, which she had thought merely wise, held depths that spoke of centuries rather than decades. "I have ruled this empire for 60 years, he began, his voice taking on the quality of distant thunder, "but I have walked this earth for far longer than that. What you see before you is not a man in the traditional sense, but something that should have passed beyond the veil of mortality long ago." He rose and walked to an ornate cabinet, withdrawing a scroll that seemed ancient beyond measure. As he unrolled it, Mei Lin saw it contained writings in a script she did not recognize, accompanied by illustrations of celestial beings and mystical symbols. "When I was truly 25 years old, I encountered a Taoist immortal in the mountains of Sichuan. He offered me a gift, eternal life to serve my people forever. I was young and foolish, and I thought only of the good I could do if I never aged, never died, never had to pass the burden of rule to others who might not share my dedication. The scroll revealed illustrations of the ritual he described, a young man kneeling before a figure whose face was obscured by divine light, accepting a jade cup that glowed within a fire. But immortality, I learned, comes with a price far greater than death. I have watched my children age and die, seen my friends become dust, witnessed the slow decay of everything I have ever loved. Worse still, the ritual that granted me eternal life requires renewal, a renewal that can only be achieved through the life force of others. Mei Lin's blood turned to ice as understanding dawned. "The previous empresses," she whispered, "that is how they died." His nod was barely perceptible, but it confirmed her worst fears. 7 beautiful, innocent women who married me believing they were entering a fairy tale. Instead, they became unwilling sacrifices to sustain a life that should have ended decades ago. The revelation hung between them like a sword suspended by a silk thread. Mei Lin found herself unable to move, unable to breathe, unable to fully comprehend the magnitude of what she had just learned. The man, the creature she had married, was a monster who had sustained his unnatural life by consuming the vitality of young women. "Why are you telling me this?" she managed to whisper. "If you mean to do to me what you did to them, why reveal your secret?" Emperor Kangxi returned to the window, his silhouette seeming to waver in the moonlight like a ghost already half departed from the world. "Because, Mei Lin, I am tired. More tired than you can possibly imagine. For 6 decades, I have carried the weight of an empire and the burden of this cursed existence. Each woman who died to sustain my life took a piece of my humanity with her." He turned back to face her, and she was startled to see what looked like tears gathering in his ancient eyes. "When I looked upon your face in the Hall of Supreme Harmony, I saw something I had forgotten existed. Innocence unmarked by the corruption of power. You reminded me of the man I once was before I made the choice that damned me to this existence." Mei Lin's fear began to transform into something more complex, a mixture of pity, horror, and strange understanding. "What are you saying?" "I am saying that I have decided to break the cycle. The ritual that sustains me must be performed before the next new moon, or I will finally be allowed to pass into the realm of the dead where I belong. I will not take your life to extend my own existence." Whoa! The implications of his words crashed over her like a wave. "But if you die, what will happen to the empire, to the millions of people who depend upon your rule?" "That," he said softly, "is a choice you must help me make. For there is another way, one that would require your willing participation but would not cost your life. The ancient texts speak of a ritual that can transfer immortality from one person to another. You could take my place, become the eternal guardian of this empire." Mei Lin felt the world spinning around her. In the space of a single conversation, she had gone from being a terrified bride to holding the fate of an entire empire in her hands. The choice before her was impossible: allow her husband to die and watch the empire potentially fall into chaos, or accept the burden of immortality and condemn herself to the same isolation and sorrow that had driven him to the brink of despair. Sleep eluded Mei Lin that night as she wrestled with the impossible choice before her. She walked through the imperial apartments like a restless spirit, touching silk tapestries and jade ornaments that now seemed like relics from a lost world. By dawn, she had made a decision that surprised even herself. "I want to see the texts," she told the emperor when he found her in the garden at sunrise. "If I'm to make this choice, I need to understand exactly what immortality means, not just the burden you described, but everything. Emperor Kangxi led her through secret passages she had never known existed, deep beneath the forbidden city to chambers that predated the current palace by centuries. Here, in rooms carved from living rock and lit by eternal flames that burned without fuel, lay the true treasures of the empire, not gold or jewels, but knowledge gathered across millennia. The texts were more revealing than she had expected. Immortality, she learned, was not simply living forever. It granted enhanced wisdom, the ability to see the true nature of people's hearts, and most importantly, the power to guide the spiritual development of an entire civilization. The emperor had not merely been ruling through political means, but through a subtle influence that helped elevate the consciousness of his people. This is why the empire has prospered under your rule, she realized as she studied illustrations of the immortals' true powers. You have been more than a political leader. You have been a spiritual guardian. Yes, he confirmed. And when I die, that guidance will end. The empire will not merely lose its emperor, but its hidden protector. Wars will come, corruption will spread, and millions will suffer. But as Mei Lin read deeper into the ancient texts, she discovered something the emperor had not mentioned, something that changed everything. The ritual of transfer did not merely pass immortality from one person to another. It was designed to be performed by two people working in harmony, creating not one immortal guardian, but two. You knew, she said, looking up from the scroll that detailed the dual ritual. You knew that we could both become immortal guardians, sharing the burden, instead of one person carrying it alone. Why did you not tell me? The emperor's expression grew troubled. Because the ritual requires something that cannot be forced or manipulated. It requires genuine love between the participants. Without that emotional bond, the transfer fails, and both participants die. I could not ask you to love a monster like me. Mei Lin set down the scroll and studied the face of the man who had been haunted by loneliness for decades. Slowly, she began to see past the supernatural aspects of his existence to the fundamental truth beneath. He was a soul who had sacrificed everything for duty, who had borne unimaginable burdens to protect others, who had finally chosen to die rather than continue causing harm. Perhaps, she said quietly, that is not your choice to make. In the days that followed, Mei Lin insisted on spending time with Kangxi, not as emperor and consort, but simply as two people trying to understand each other. She asked him to show her how he spent his days, to explain the decisions he made and the wisdom he had gained through decades of rule. What she discovered was a man of profound depth and unexpected gentleness. Despite his supernatural nature, he remembered what it felt like to be human. He spoke of missing the simple pleasure of taste, of longing to feel genuine warmth, of the deep sadness that came from watching everyone he cared about age and die, while he remained unchanged. "Show me your memories," she requested one evening as they sat in his private study. "If I am to understand what immortality truly means, I need to see what you have experienced." Using powers she was only beginning to comprehend, Kangxi shared with her the visions of his centuries of existence. She saw him as a young man full of idealistic dreams, watched him struggle with the moral complexities of absolute power, witnessed his horror as he realized what the price of immortality truly was. But she also saw the good he had accomplished, famines prevented through his supernatural ability to predict weather patterns, wars avoided through his deep understanding of human nature, cultural achievements fostered by his eternal perspective on civilization's development. "You have been alone for so long," she observed after witnessing decades of his memories. "How did you bear it?" "By focusing on duty rather than personal happiness," he replied. "But lately, even that has not been enough. The loneliness has become unbearable." It was then that Mei Lin began to understand something that surprised her. Despite the supernatural circumstances of their marriage, despite her initial terror, she was beginning to genuinely care for this ancient, tortured soul. He was not the monster she had first believed, but a being who had made terrible sacrifices for the greater good. That night, for the first time since their wedding, she did not flinch when he touched her hand. And for the first time in decades, his skin felt almost warm against hers. Lin Wei noticed the change in her demeanor when they encountered each other in the garden the next morning. "You look different," he observed with concern. "Are you well, my lady?" "I am beginning to understand," she replied, "that sometimes the most frightening things are not what they appear to be." The new moon approached with startling swiftness, and with it, the deadline for Kangxi's choice between renewal and death. Mei Lin found herself spending every available moment with her husband, drawn by a fascination that had evolved far beyond mere sympathy. She was beginning to see him as he truly was, not a monster or a distant ruler, but a soul who had endured unimaginable trials for the sake of others. One evening, as they walked through the moonlit courtyards, she asked the question that had been haunting her thoughts. If we perform the dual ritual and both become immortal, what would our lives be like? Kangxi stopped beside a lotus pool where golden fish swam in lazy circles beneath the surface. We would be partners in every sense, ruling together, sharing the burdens of guardianship, protecting the empire as a united force. The loneliness that has nearly destroyed me would end, but we would face new challenges. Immortals cannot have children, and we would watch every person we care about grow old and die while we remain unchanged. But we would have each other? Mei Lin said softly. Yes, he replied, his voice barely above a whisper. If the ritual succeeds, we would have each other for eternity. That night, lying in the great imperial bed with her husband beside her, Mei Lin finally acknowledged the truth she had been avoiding. Despite the supernatural circumstances, despite the terrifying revelations, despite the impossible choices before them, she had fallen in love with Kangxi. Not with his power or position, but with the gentle, tortured soul beneath the immortal exterior. The realization both thrilled and terrified her. Love had the power to make the dual ritual possible, but it also meant that if they chose mortality instead, losing him would break her heart in ways she could barely imagine. "I need to tell you something," she said, turning to face him in the darkness. "I know," he replied, and she could hear the wonder in his voice. "I can sense the change in your heart. For the first time in decades, when I touch you, I feel warmth instead of cold emptiness. But Mei Lin, you must be absolutely certain. If we attempt the dual ritual and your love is not strong enough or pure enough, we will both die. And if we do not attempt it, you will die anyway, and I will be left alone to mourn a love I was too afraid to fully embrace." They lay in silence for a long moment, both understanding that they stood at a crossroads that would determine not just their own fates, but the future of an entire empire. "Then we have 3 days to be certain," Kangxi said finally. 3 days to determine whether what we feel is strong enough to bind our souls together for eternity. The next 3 days passed like a dream touched by elements of both wonder and nightmare. Kangxi, knowing that these might be his final days of existence, showed Mei Lin aspects of his immortal nature that took her breath away. He could perceive the thoughts and emotions of others, communicate with animals, and even glimpse fragments of possible futures. "The Empire stands at a crossroads," he explained, as they stood on the highest tower of the palace, looking out over the vast city spread below them. "In the visions, I see paths where it prospers for centuries, and others where it falls into chaos within decades. The difference in most cases depends upon having wise, long-term guidance that mortal rulers cannot provide." But he also showed her the darker aspects of immortal existence, The gradual erosion of human connections, the way that normal people became like children in comparison to an immortal's vast experience, the crushing weight of making decisions that would affect millions of lives across generations. "I have tried to rule justly," he told her, "but I have also had to make choices that cost thousands of lives to save millions. Can you accept that burden? Can you make decisions that will haunt you for centuries?" Mei Lin spent long hours in contemplation, often walking in the gardens where Lin Wei continued to watch over her with worried eyes. She knew he had developed feelings for her, and she felt guilty about the pain her choice would cause him, regardless of what she decided. "You care for him," Lin Wei said one afternoon as they sat beside a small waterfall. "I can see it in your eyes when you speak of the Emperor." "Yes," she admitted. "I know it seems impossible given the circumstances, but I do." "Then you must follow your heart," he said, though she could see the sadness in his expression. "Even if it leads you away from the world I know." On the final night before the new moon, Mei Lin made her decision. She found Kangxi in his study, preparing for the renewal ritual that would cost her life if they chose the traditional path. "I want to attempt the dual ritual," she said without preamble. "Not because of duty or fear, but because I love you. I love the man you were, the guardian you have become, and the possibility of who we could be together." Kangxi looked up from the ancient texts, his eyes reflecting centuries of longing and hope he had thought lost forever. "Are you certain? Once we begin, there can be no going back." "I am certain," she replied, and for the first time since their wedding night, she reached out to take his hand willingly. This time, his skin felt warm beneath her touch. The chamber deep beneath the Forbidden City had been prepared according to specifications laid down in texts older than recorded history. Mystical symbols covered every surface, carved into stone and inlaid with gold that seemed to pulse with its own inner light. At the center of the room stood an altar of white jade, upon which rested 2 cups carved from a single piece of crystal. Mei Lin and Kangxi approached the altar wearing simple robes of white silk, having cast aside all symbols of earthly power and position. In this place, they were not emperor and consort, but 2 souls preparing to bind themselves together for eternity. "The ritual must be performed at the exact moment of the new moon," Kangxi explained, his voice echoing strangely in the mystical chamber. "We will drink from the cups simultaneously, and then the ancient words must be spoken in perfect harmony. If our hearts are truly united, the immortal essence will flow between us, creating 2 guardians where there was once one." As midnight approached, they took their positions on opposite sides of the altar. The crystal cups contained a liquid that seemed to shift between deep red and brilliant gold, as if it contained the very essence of life itself. "If this fails," Mei Lin said, looking across the altar at the man she had grown to love, "I want you to know that these past weeks have been the happiest of my life." "And if it succeeds," Kangxi replied, "they will be only the beginning of a love that spans centuries." The bells of the palace began to toll midnight, marking the arrival of the new moon. Together, they lifted the crystal cups, and Mei Lin was amazed to feel the liquid within pulsing with warmth that seemed to match the beating of her heart. "To eternity," Kangxi said. "To love," Mei Lin replied. They drank simultaneously, and immediately Mei Lin felt power unlike anything she had ever imagined flowing through her veins. The chamber filled with light that seemed to emanate from their very beings, and she could feel Kangxi's consciousness touching her own, their souls beginning to intertwine in ways that transcended mortal understanding. The ancient words came to her lips without conscious thought, spoken in harmony with her husband as if they had rehearsed them for lifetimes. Around them, the mystical symbols began to glow with increasing intensity, and she felt herself changing, transforming into something more than human while still retaining the essential core of who she was. When the light finally faded and the ritual was complete, Mei Lin looked across the altar at Kangxi and saw him with new eyes. Eyes that could perceive the immortal flame within him, the compassionate heart that had sustained him through decades of lonely duty, the love that now bound them together with bonds stronger than death itself. Dawn broke over the Forbidden City to find it transformed in subtle but profound ways. The very air seemed cleaner, the colors more vibrant, the ancient stones humming with an energy that spoke of renewal and hope. Within the palace walls, courtiers and servants went about their duties, unaware that during the night, their world had gained not one but two immortal guardians. Mei Lin stood on the balcony of the imperial apartments, marveling at the enhanced perceptions her transformation had brought. She could sense the thoughts and emotions of everyone within the palace walls, feel the pulse of life flowing through the great city beyond, and perceive the delicate balance of forces that kept the empire stable. "It will take time to fully understand your new abilities," Kangxi said, joining her to watch the sunrise. In the morning light, he looked younger than she had ever seen him. Not physically, for immortals did not age, but spiritually renewed by the end of his centuries of loneliness. "I can feel them," she said wonderingly. "All of them, every person in the city, their hopes and fears and dreams. How do you bear it without being overwhelmed?" "You learn to filter the perceptions, to focus on what is most important while remaining aware of the greater pattern. It becomes natural with time." Together they began the work that would define their eternal partnership. Using their combined wisdom and supernatural abilities, they guided the empire through challenges that would have destroyed it under mortal leadership. They prevented famines by sensing weather patterns months in advance, avoided wars through their deep understanding of human nature, and fostered cultural and technological developments that elevated their civilization to unprecedented heights. Lin Wei remained as captain of the palace guard, one of the few mortals who knew the truth about their nature. Though his heart still carried love for Mei Lin, he found peace in serving the greater good she now represented. "Do you ever regret your choice?" Kangxi asked her one evening as they walked through gardens that bloomed with supernatural beauty under their care. Mei Lin considered the question seriously. The burden of immortality was real. They would indeed watch every mortal they cared about age and die, would face challenges across centuries that would test their wisdom and compassion in ways she could not yet imagine. "No," she said finally. "Love shared is not love diminished, and duty shared is not burden doubled. Together we are stronger than either of us could have been alone." In the years that followed, their love became legendary among the people, though few knew the supernatural truth behind it. They ruled as partners in all things, their combined wisdom bringing peace and prosperity to the empire that would endure for centuries to come. The forced marriage that had begun in terror and political necessity had transformed into something far greater, a love story that transcended mortality itself. Where once there had been an isolated, tortured immortal slowly dying from loneliness, there were now two eternal guardians whose bond grew stronger with each passing season. And in the deepest vaults beneath the Forbidden City, the ancient texts recorded their story for future generations, the tale of how love conquered even death itself, and how two souls found in each other the strength to bear the infinite responsibility of protecting an entire civilization. Their reign would span centuries. Their love would inspire countless generations, and their wisdom would guide the empire through ages of glory that mortals could only dream of achieving. The young peasant girl who had once trembled before an ancient emperor had become something far greater than she had ever imagined possible. She had become eternal love incarnate, bound forever to the soul that had chosen to risk everything rather than cause her harm. In the end, the greatest magic was not the immortality they shared, but the love that had made such immortality not a burden to be endured, but a gift to be treasured for all eternity.